This week, we're stepping into the ring for a special spotlight on wrestling comics. We'll be taking a look at books that celebrate wrestling, whether it's comic based on legendary promotions, titles featuring famous wrestlers, a project that they've helped create themselves. We'll break down why these books matter, take a peek at their CGC census numbers, and check out how they're doing on the market today. Plus, we'll share a few of our own memories of wrestling growing up. This one's all about having some fun. So lace up your boots, grab a chair, a folding kind, and let's get started. Here's Created Spotlight Wrestling Comics. Before we ring the final bell, a big thank you to one of our sponsors, Global Comics. If today's spotlight got you in the mood for more wrestling action, you can read a wider range of wrestling comics right now on their platform. And here's the best part. Just scan the QR code on your screen to unlock a special IzzyVerse discount that gives you 33% off a yearly subscription to Global Comics. Whether you're into body slams, backstage drama, or just great storytelling, they got you covered. Act now and go to globalcomics.com for your subscription. Back to the show. It's Creator Spotlights. We're doing the top 20 wrestling comics. Again, this is not the most expensive comics. This is not the greatest comics. This is a subjective list. It is not even a countdown because we're going based on year. So we're going from oldest to newest. There are some comic books in this list that I know many of you are going to be like, yes. And there's some comic books in this list that you may have never even seen before. That's the cool thing about it. In honor of WrestleMania, we did it. Also kind of like, you know, people are talking about it. Wrestling's in the forefront right now. So why not do it? Shane, you talked to me a little bit before we got the video started. What's your thoughts on wrestling comics in general?
I think it's a great crossover, like, because it's just fun because you can take some of these stories and, you know, kind of explode them a little bit in comic form. So I think it's fun.
Yeah, I agree. I think what's really cool is we get to see these characters outside of the landscape of wrestling, because wrestling in general is a soap opera. Professional wrestling is a soap opera, whether you're into AEW, whether you're into WWE, whether you're even into more of the indie stuff, there's still a story being told. And what better way of doing that? So what we're going to start things off here is our honorable mentions. This is something that's very interesting because when I look at the honorable mentions, I'm looking at books here. To be completely frank with you, they were hard to track. I was talking to you today. I was like, it's hard to track these books.
Yeah.
And I was doing some crazy stuff looking at it. So let's first take a look at that first book here. And that's El Mascarero de Plata, right? That is the luchador of gold. And it features a popular wrestler from the 50s known as El Santo. The El Santo, for many, is considered the greatest luchador in the world. Take that, Rey Mysterio. But El Santo was one of these wrestlers that we talk about. Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, moving into Hollywood. El Santo did that already. In fact, in Mexican wrestling, a lot of these characters would do film and there would be movies. They would do plenty of movies with them. El Santo is one of those characters that he did so many. I can't even tell you how many movies he's done. And he was very popular at his height, which was the 50s, and Lucha Libre in general, which we're going to see a little bit of Lucha Libre books as well. Lucha Libre is a different type of art form when it comes to wrestling. It's more of a high-flying, risk-taking approach to it, which has been adopted in American wrestling today more so than before. Then we have the second one, which a lot of people, it's known as Tiger Mask, and this is a Japanese manga book. Wrestling is huge in Japan. their wrestling, they take wrestling more like a sport. There is an art, it's an art form, and it is storytelling still, so there's still story being delivered, but they could have like 30, 40, 60-minute matches because the wrestling is what's the story to them. It's not like what we do it where there's got to be a reason for these two guys to fight.
Yeah.
Right. And with Tiger Mask, it's an approach, it's a love letter to Japanese wrestling from that era. This book came out in the 60s. All right. Our next book here is called WWE Superstars. And this one is a fun one too, because it's more about the cover here. So we have here a variant of the immortal Hulk Hogan. Now, as of today, he's a very divisive character. But during this time period, he was probably the biggest wrestler ever. He's the guy that made wrestling a household name. So Hulk Hogan was a household name. And this is a cover done by Joe Jusko, so you have to throw it in there. And finally, you're probably saying to yourself, what is G.I. Joe doing in this mix? If you're a G.I. Joe fan, G.I. Joe 48 is the first comic book appearance of Sergeant Slaughter, which was a big part of G.I. Joe, especially in the 80s. He was part of the cartoon series and everything of that nature. So, tell me, what's your thoughts on the honorable mentions?
I love it because like Sergeant Slaughter and obviously Hulk, that was the peak of my stuff. I remember I completely forgot about Sergeant Slaughter until I saw that picture for the first time, and I'm like, oh yeah, right, Sergeant Slaughter. I remember him now.
You maggots.
Yeah.
But out of all these, we got El Santo with Lucha Libre. You got Tiger Mask with Japanese wrestling. Hulk Hogan, who, say what you want to say, he's an icon in the wrestling industry. He's not loved anymore, I'll tell you that much. But and then Sergeant Slaughter. So you got 4 comics that are very different from each other, but very related to each other.
Yeah, for sure. And it's amazing that even in the 50s, with how kind of basically new comic books were at that point, that they're already incorporating like wrestling comics. So I just think that's awesome.
There were tons, and it was so hard for me to find them, but they're out there. They're Mexican comics. I couldn't find this in Cover Price. I couldn't find this in Go Collect. I couldn't find this, but I found them. So I did find something. And this is actually a movie poster because, of course, it was the 50s. They would have a lot of movie posters, but the comic book does exist. I can't tell you the price, how much they cost. They're very hard to track down. So, but they're out there. So let's go into our first book, and it's another one of those rare books. It is Mr. Universe #1. This book came out in 1951 from an indie company, Stanley Morris. High sale of this book, I found it for $1,560 at an 8.5, and that was in April of 2024. Last sale of this book was $80 at a fine, and that was in January. The raws are going for about $80, no grade. And a 9.0 you could find for that $1,560. There's only 8 copies in the census. And this tells the story of Mr. Universe, who was a professional wrestling champion who traveled the world to compete in matches and look for adventures with his friends Jeff Clayton and Scarcely. What a name. This character was created by Ross Andrew.
Wow, this Izzy, you could be starting a whole new thing here. Like everybody's after pre-code horror now. You could be starting. Everybody's going to go after these old wrestling
Pre-code wrestling.
Yeah.
That would be something. That'd be really cool, man. But I look at this character, I'm like, wow, this is something I've never seen before. And it was funny when I was tracking it down and I found Mr. Universe. I said, okay, interesting. You know, the character had some popularity. Of course, it didn't last long, but it's just cool. He has the cape right there. So, you know, there's that superhero part to it.
Yeah.
And, you know, the trunks and things like that. So a lot of people don't even know that Superman's origin, his costume, goes back to wrestling. So it really does,
Yep.
So a lot of people don't know that, but that's how it, the whole carnival strongman approach, which blend into wrestling, and there's even terms in wrestling called carnies, which is part of it, and that's why we're looking at it. So, Mr. Universe, this is the oldest comic book I was able to find. There may be older ones, I can't find them.
Yeah.
This is the oldest one. So, if you guys know, let me know in the comments. If you know of an older comic book, I would love to hear it, and I love to see it. And this is one that, again, I put it in there because of the fun aspect to it, and that is The Thing issue 28. This book is $90 at a 9.8. That was the last high sale, December 25th on Christmas in 2020. Last sale of this book was $4 on April, and that's the fair market value for the Raws. It's $50 at a 9.6. Only 15 copies in the census. And this is the best part: The Thing in a wrestling ring. Um, so this is pretty much The Thing in as a wrestler. So he's joined a wrestling federation and all that fun stuff.
Yeah,
It's a cool little side story, nothing crazy.
I love this cover because just in case you didn't know by the title that it's The Thing, you've got the picture he's in, then him in the foreground, in the logo, and in the top corner. You
Just
got
to make sure you know it's The Thing.
right, yeah, there's four different ways you could not be confused and think it was some other thing.
And don't and you say four, but his face is also in the cover four times.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure you know you're going for the Thing comic book. Okay, let's move on to our next comic. This one's actually pretty sought after, and that's WWF Battle Mania #1. This book came out in 1991 for Valiant Comics. High sale of this book is $178 and 9.2. That was in February 21st of 2015. Would you believe that was that long ago? 10 years ago. Last sale of this book was $14. Very fine. Again, that is the fair market value. 9.6 go for about $105. There's only 25 copies in the census, and this is just a whole bunch of stories. This is really WWF's first approach into comic books. Series only lasted for 5 issues, but it features art by Steve Ditko, Jim Shooter, and a story by Dwayne McDuffie in the series.
Yeah, and Ultimate Warrior, he was such a, I mean, the character in wrestling was amazing. A little sad story for the actual person playing it, but
Yeah.
or playing him. But I loved his matches. I thought they were so full of energy and awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about Ultimate Warrior because this is not going to be the last time we see Ultimate Warrior. But Battle Mania, the comic book itself, Valiant Comics, this is before Valiant was doing their own Valiant universe. And they were testing the waters with licensed properties. So, we had the wrestling comics with WWF. Then you had the video game comics with Super Mario, Legend of Zelda, which really people are tracking for, and those books are asking for top dollar. This one, on the other hand, didn't really do that, which I think was interesting, especially, with a lot of comic book fans are usually wrestling fans too. So there's this Venn diagram of wrestling fan, comic book fans, and even amongst us in the community, some of us are big wrestling fans who also happen to read comic books. There's not a lot of comic books out there that really take that wrestling notion that's out there, or when they do, like this one, it kind of becomes hokey. We'll
Yeah,
get to more stuff later when we talk a little bit more about some books that took it a little more serious, but it becomes hokey, it becomes generic, it becomes kind of the same thing as like the equivalent of kids comics and things like that, because they're supposed to attract all ages.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. Our next book is WCW World Championship Wrestling #1. This book came out in 1991 from Marvel Comics. High sale of this book was $200 and a 9.4. With a little asterisk, that was because it was signed by the guy who's in the cover right now, Lex Luger, which he was just inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame this week. So congratulations go out to Lex Luger. It was January 2024 that this book sold. Last sale of this book was $6 at a fine, and the Raws are now going for about $8 very fine. 9.6 is $8 on average, and there's 52 copies in the census. This was WCW's attempt on getting into the comic book business. There's some books in this group that people actually do seek out for, but you get most of the covers are photo covers as opposed to having artwork, but the interiors are comics.
Yeah, and this was when Marvel was struggling a bit, so they're licensing, selling, they're doing whatever they can to try to create interest.
Yeah, and at this time, WCW even wasn't big time WCW. This was so as you were saying, Marvel was struggling a little bit. They just lost a couple of people to Image, so this is kind of like when Image started. Marvel was going on their trajectory going downward, so they were just trying to do a couple of things here and there. But WCW at this time was also struggling because they couldn't find their calling yet, I guess you could say. And that's why this book is here. Again, another book that, for lack of a better term, it's just a comic book, fun comic book for kids, all ages, and that's kind of the approach they were taking it with it. Stories are not that great, I'll be honest. Love and Rockets 46. This one came out in 1994 for Fantagraphics. The high sale of this book was $17 raw, and that was in December of 2021. Last sale of this book was $5 in January, and that is the fair market value. There's 0 comics in the census. We talked about Love and Rockets before when we were talking about indie comics. The Hernandez brothers were big fans of Mexican wrestling, and this is one of those stories where they utilized, and they even created a character that they will continue to use more and more when it came to. So, Mexican lucha libre. Then, if you could see right there from the image, you could tell that the character in white was paying homage to El Santo, who was an all white kind of character, very superhuman like in general.
I love that mask. I think it's hilarious.
Which one? The one that's in the foreground?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's something that's very popular in Mexican wrestling. How the mask is created. It's telling a story. Mexican wrestling, lucha libre, as is referred to, has always been traditional, but it always, at the same time, has been very family driven. So a lot of wrestlers take up the mantle of their family members or their, like their father. They wouldn't go by their father's name. So you'll have a character, it'll be like El Hijo, like the son of El Santo, or they'll say Junior, like Rey Mysterio himself, who is a luchador. His wrestling luchador name is Rey Mysterio Jr. and not Rey Mysterio. They got rid of the Junior when he made it to WWE. He's not the son of Rey Mysterio. He's actually the nephew. So it's one of those things where it's a little different there. But again, another one of these stories, and this is just a story. Has nothing to do with, superhero stuff or anything like that. But that's what's really cool about this one with Love and Rockets. Talked about Warrior #1. This book came out in 1996 for Ultimate Creations, which is the indie print of the Ultimate Warrior. This was written by the Ultimate Warrior with some help by Jonathan D. Smith, James Calhoun, and the Sharp Boys. It depicts adventures of the warrior in his conquest to master the philosophy of Destruction City. Destruction, you see, I don't even know how to say it. And the journey through the terrain of Testament to set right what was wrong. This book has a high sale of $190 and a 9.6, and that was in December of 2024. $4 is the last sale of a very good, and fair market value $6 for raws, while $190 for graded. There's 38 copies in the census. This was interesting because you talked a little bit about the story of the warrior being sad. It is a sad story, but at this time, because of legal issues, and let's be honest, the creation of the Ultimate Warrior was a WWE project, even though he did go by a different character, which was pretty much the same character beforehand, which was known as the Dingo Warrior. Yes, he was called the Dingo Warrior. When he went to WWE, he was picked up. He signed with them, and it was WWE that came up and coined the term the Ultimate Warrior. And so they owned the rights to the name. So what Jim Hellwig did, which is the man behind the name Ultimate Warrior, is he tried to legally change his name to Ultimate Warrior. Like, legally speaking, his name became Ultimate Warrior. And as a result, he figured he could do that.
Yeah.
He was able to change his name, but he still wasn't able. He didn't have the licensee to use the name Ultimate Warrior. So they decided to keep it simple, just go by Warrior, because a lot of people just called him Warrior as well, which he was allowed to do. Notice that the company's name is Ultimate Creations. So he wanted to throw in the Ultimate somewhere.
Yeah, I know.
And he did that, of course. He you know, him and there's this whole story about his breakdown, because the man Jim Hellwig was a very, very interesting dude. His ideologies, some people are not thrilled about some of his ideologies. Some people even consider him a bit of a racist as well. In the ring, he wasn't a solid wrestler. In fact, he was more of a bodybuilder type, and he was not liked among the boys in the back. Specifically, Andre the Giant didn't like him. And if Andre the Giant don't like you, ooh, that's not good.
No, that's bad news.
Yeah. So talk to me about your love for Ultimate Warrior, because he was my favorite too growing up.
I just thought, like just right from the opening, because they'd start the music and he would just run like full steam down to the ring. I just thought it was awesome. Like, it was just cool to see. And obviously, like, the fan reaction was amazing watching those matches. Like, the crowd went nuts.
Yeah. I had the privilege to go to the very first SummerSlam event in 1988. And it was in Madison Square Garden, obviously, since I'm in New York. And there was supposed to be a match between the Honky Tonk Man versus Brutus the Barber Beefcake. Now, my knowledge of wrestling is pretty much the same way as my knowledge of comic books. I know too much. Okay? So this match was happening, but Brutus the Barber Beefcake was injured in a previous match. So they did this whole angle where his face got cut off and they wrote him off of the story. So they left Honky Tonk Man without an opponent for the evening. So Honky Tonk Man is at the center of the ring. He's there. He's like open challenge type of thing. You know, he's a heel. So he's like, yeah, anybody who wants to come out, I'm going to beat your butt. You know, that kind of thing, right? And Ultimate Warrior at this time was gaining traction, but he wasn't a household name just yet. But he was showing up on the shows and people were watching him and things like that. People knew of him, and he was getting that momentum already, but he didn't have his moment yet. And again, it was a surprise entry. Honky Tonk's shouting out. He's like, anybody who wants to come in the back. And I'm like, I'm there with my little sister, my father, my uncle, and we're there like, and in my head, I'm like, you know who doesn't have a match tonight? And my little sister's like, who? It's like, Ultimate Warrior, he doesn't have a match tonight. So, and she was like, what? And then out of nowhere, it got quiet. And then, like you said, you had the heavy metal. He runs into the ring, does a little thing. Honky Tonk's like confused out of his mind. He's still holding his guitar in his hand, mind you. And the bell rings. He's still running. He clotheslined Honky Tonk Man. Honky Tonk Man went flying, picks him up, does his press slam, dropped him. And the second we sat down, so it was one of those things that the music came up and the whole audience stands up, right? So the minute we went to sit down, he pinned them 1, 2, 3, and we just stand up right again. One of the coolest experiences I ever, and then he ran out again. So the match in itself is like 15 seconds long.
Yeah.
Like it was one of the coolest things. Obviously, his match with Hogan in WrestleMania 6 was a classic. He wins it. And again, he was just one of those guys that he was intensity. He was, you didn't get long matches from Ultimate Warrior.
No.
They were meant to be squashes, and a lot of people were not fans of that. Because it's like, this guy's not really a wrestler. It's like, yeah, but the kids love him. And his promos were crazy. And thus, what you read here is how he actually did his promos.
Yeah. Yeah, the promos were awesome.
So great stuff. Warrior number 1, the book definitely worth checking out. Our next book is The Undertaker. This book came out in 1999 for Chaos Comics. High sale of this book was $300 at a 9.8. Also, that was a signed comic book that was sold in November of 2015. Last sale of this book was $3, and the fair market value is also $3. I could not find other slabs being sold for this book, but there are 107 copies in the census. I do believe this is the book that has more census count than any other book in this list. So that's a big deal. This was the start of WWF at the time licensing their characters to Chaos Comics. And I think this is the first time we got to see wrestlers in a comic book environment, in the sense of, we're going to tell you an actual story. One of the things Chaos Comics did was they told us really cool stories, and Undertaker was the start of it.
Yeah, and Undertaker was probably one of my favorites too, because like you with that match, it wasn't there live, but I remember when his first match, and he came out and he did the thing where he walks along the top rope, and it's just like, look at the size of this guy. It was just awesome. It was really good. He was a great character.
Yeah, another character. Yeah, that his first WWE appearance was at the Survivor Series, where he was like the mystery partner of DiBiase, and when he shows up, it was a character. It had no right to be as long as it did, because it was straight up a comic book character come to life. So The Undertaker was a comic book character. He's the dead man. When he fought, you couldn't beat him, but yet his source of strength was the urn and all that. And they built on it. At this time with Chaos Comics, Undertaker was going through one of his transitions where he was becoming more of an evil, kind of like cult leader character. And they kind of blend into that storyline here in 99, because this is the height of the Attitude Era. Right here during this time, it was the height. Attitude Era was like top notch. There's an Undertaker comic book. There's a Stone Cold comic book. There was a China comic book. Like I said, I went over the list, and I wanted to make sure I could get this most for you guys, but I am letting you guys know that there is a Stone Cold. There is a China. There's a Mankind one as well. This one's really cool because he is dealing with the underworld, and it's kind of a horror comic book, which I think is really cool, and it fits well to the character. All right, let's take a look at our next book in this list, and that is Nash #1. This also came out in 1999 for Image Comics. A high sale of this book was only $10 at a Raw, and that was recent. It was actually in April 2022. Recently, the book sold for $3. That's the fair market value. There are 9 slabs in the census for this book. And this one's really funny because star vehicle for wrestler Kevin Nash, placing him in a non-wrestling post-apocalyptic action role. So Big Daddy Cool Diesel has his own Mad Max-like story with Nash. And this is an Image comic.
Yeah. And I don't know a whole lot about this one, but I like that cover. I think it's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's another cover with him and like 3 sexy women, like in their bikinis. But I thought it was interesting. Merritt Michaels, he did the artwork for the book, so they worked together, and he got the comic book out. Again, it was just one of those things like, let me do a comic book and stuff. So it is co-written by Kevin Nash, so he did co-write it. Fun stuff. Nothing too crazy. If you get it for $1 bin, it's a $1 bin book, man.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Next book is one that I think is underrated. That's Spider-Man's Tangled Web, issue number 14. This book came out in 2002 from Marvel Comics. High sale of this book is $54 at a 9.8, and that was in January 2025, which was this year. Last sale of this book was $3, very fine, which is also the fair market value. $54 is also the fair market value for 9.8. There's only 5 copies in the census for this book, and this is a story of Crusher Hogan, the man that was beaten by Spider-Man, whose life falls apart after his defeat in the ring by the super strong Spider-Man, now reduced to a janitorial job at a gym, creating tall tales about Spider-Man to make himself seem like a big shot. One of the things about Spider-Man Tangled Web that I really love was Tangled Web was one of those comics that when it came out, it told stories of Spider-Man supporting characters. And there's some really, really good stories. This is a very underrated series. Again, like the other ones, this one's another one. It's like it's telling the story of what happened to Crusher Hogan after his defeat to Spider-Man.
Yeah, and when we were talking about this before, I checked and I have this series, except for I stopped at issue 10 for some reason. But I agree about the series. I thought it was a really good take on all these side characters and a little bit more of their story. I love this cover too, the the event sheet cover type thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely good. There's a great story with one of Kingpin's henchmen that lost a battle with Spider-Man. That story is intense. That's a good story. There's a great Rhino story as well. Go check out Spider-Man's Tangled Web. You have some really solid, good stories in Tangled Web, and I don't think a single one of them is are expensive. They're very affordable books. Our next book in this list is Headlock, Work of Art #1. This book came out in 2007 from Visionary Comics. High sale of this book is $3 raw. That's also the fair market value. There's only 2 copies in the census. This is the story of Mike Hartman, who dreams of being a professional wrestler, and he will sacrifice anything to achieve it. He doesn't realize he's entering in a world that hasn't changed much since its Carney days, a world of drugs, sex, and violence, both scripted and unscripted. Now, I'm sure you might not be familiar with this book. I'm assuming you're not. This is written by a good friend of mine. His name is Michael Kingston. He does the Headlock comic books, which is still a series that continues today. He understands the business. He knows the business. And whenever there's a wrestler who is showing up in a convention, he's kind of an agent or a manager for them. So he's someone that books these shows. Every time I go to a convention and he's there, I have to talk to him about wrestling because his insight knowledge is crazy, because he knows the insides of wrestling because he's part of that world. And he has this series. He's done work with other wrestlers like Mick Foley, like Jerry Lawler, Godfather, and the books are still, as of today, he's still cranking them out.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are more like, so they're based out of real life. So they're not superhero stories, but they're great stories. Go check out Headlock. It's multiple issues, but this one is the first one. Okay. Our next book is WWE Heroes #1. This book came out in 2010 for Titan Books. High sale of this book was $20 at an 8.5, and that was in December of 2023. Last sale of this book is $2. Fair market value is $3, and that $20 is the fair market value. It is the only book in the census for this book. I saw this cover and I immediately started cracking up laughing because it's Triple H holding a zombie.
Wrestling, zombies in comics. I mean,
in the 2010s. So this is around the Walking Dead time.
Yeah.
Right. Again, you want some fun stories? There you have it. The artwork. When I saw this artwork and I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. Nothing against the artist, but you get what I'm saying. You get what you pay for. But you want to get that 8.5. I wonder who owns that 8.5. That'd be interesting.
Probably the same person owns a lot of these books. I'm gonna guess.
That's a good chance, isn't it? Papa Wheelie.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, let's take a look at our next book. This one's a good one. It's called Andre the Giant: Life and Legend. This book came out in 2014 for a company called First Second. Interesting. High sale of this book is at $10 raw. Fair market value of this book is at $5, $6, and that was the last sale. This book is an acclaimed graphic biography offering of the intimate look at a wrestler's icon, Andre the Giant. Andre the Giant is considered by many the greatest wrestler of all time. Now, he's considered that not because of his accolades or anything like that. He's held a title maybe once or twice, but never for a long time period. But for many people, he's considered to be the greatest wrestler of all time because of what he brought to the game. He was, in the 70s, untouchable, right? And then it wasn't until the 80s where he pretty much gave the baton to Hogan and say, now you take this to the next stage. And then that's where Hogan took it to the next level. But when you saw Andre, I had the pleasure of seeing Andre the Giant a couple of times in my time. He really was that big.
Yeah. There's a really good interview with Schwarzenegger about Andre the Giant, and it's good. It's worth searching out on YouTube. And Andre the Giant was still, he had a few matches back when I was watching, but you could tell, just like you said, he was passing it along to Hulk Hogan for sure.
Yeah, he was definitely of his time period because he was a worker. And there's so many different stories of Andre the Giant, man. There's stories about him having to take multiple seats in an airport because he was too big for the seating, so they had to buy him multiple seats. I'm shocked that he didn't even have he had to fly. He had to fly first class, and he had to purchase 2 seats just to fly.
Yeah.
Right. And he was, for the most part, a lot of his life, he was very miserable because he had a condition that he was still growing, and it just didn't stop.
Yeah.
And it actually took a toll, and he actually died pretty young. He died in his 40s, like late 40s. So he was pretty young when he died. But again, he was the first star attraction first true star attraction in wrestling.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's saying a lot because you have men like Bruno Sammartino, obviously Hogan, and we talk about all the other wrestlers that followed. Yeah. Here's a fun one. Thor Annual #1. This book came out in 2015. The high sale of this book is $75 at 9.8. That was in March of this year. Last sale of this book was $3 at a near mint. Raws are going for about $8. Graded copies about $30. There's only 25 copies in the census, but this is the first writing gig for one CM Punk. And he wrote this story. He did write another one called Thrax. But CM Punk, he wrote a comic book. He loves comics.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's awesome that you could make the transition from, wrestling to writing comics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they gave him this book. He also wrote Thrax. He also did a book for Vertical Comics. There's a Vertical comic book that he wrote as well. However, Thor Annual #1 is his first comic book that he's written, and this was during the time that he wasn't in wrestling, and he was doing the UFC thing at the time, and he just he said, hey, can I write comics? And they said, yeah, let's do it. He had some help, of course, but he did it. He got his chance to write a comic book, and he wrote a couple of them.
Yeah, and I have this one, so that's good.
Oh, cool. That's awesome. Well, now you got a CM Punk comic.
That's right.
All right. Let's go to our next book, and that is Ringside #1. This came out in 2015 for Image Comics. This high sale is $30 and a 9.8, and that was all the way back in April of 2020. Last sale of this book was $3 near mint, and that's also the fair market value, and the fair market value is $30 and 9.8. There's only 4 copies in the census now. This is a critically praised wrestling noir story, exploring the gritty lives and struggles of wrestlers outside of the ring. Looks pretty interesting. It's a story I'm very interested in checking out.
Yeah, I like this cover too. Like it reminds me actually a lot of which we're going to talk about later, the Do a Powerbomb one. Like
Mm-hmm.
just that it's very similar style.
Yeah. I don't know much about this book, but I do want to check it out, especially when I like reading wrestling stories that are more grounded and not, sensationalized. So I really would like to see what this story is all about. Speaking of which, WWE Then Now Forever #1. This book came out in 2016 from Boom Studios. High sale of this book is $60 and a 9.8. That was in November of 2022. Last sale of this book was $3 near mint, which is also the fair market value. Fair market value for graded comics are $40 and 9.8. There's currently 31 copies in the census. This is when Boom Studios and WWE worked on an agreement for them to produce more comic books within WWE. Fun fact, Dan Mora did a lot of covers.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
this one I've never seen either, and we're getting to newer stuff now. So
Yeah. The character you're currently seeing right now is Dean Ambrose, now go by John Moxley for AEW. But the artwork in these books are better. They just with Boom Studios, they wanted to give quality to the books. So there's some really cool stories that you could pick up from it. It's kind of a continuation of what's going on in wrestling, and it just expanded upon that. You know what I mean? Like whatever the story is in the wrestling world, they kind of did that, but they kind of expanded. Like, why is this happening? Or the behind the scenes stuff in that with that story that they're telling. So it was kind of a good way of like an adaptation story. So kind of like when you look at Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, the comic book, how that's a prequel to the cartoon.
right.
So they kind of did the same thing here, which I thought was cool. It's a good concept. There were some great covers. Like I said, there's some really good covers. There's some good variant covers as well that you want to check out. You want to check out the Razor Ramon cover. That one's going for about $50. Our next book here is one that I don't know much about, but when I saw it, I was like, oh, this is interesting. Long Live Pro Wrestling. This book came out in 2018 for Scout Comics. High sale of this book was $35 raw, and that was in August of 2023. Last sale of this book was $3, which makes it the fair market value. Only 5 copies exist in the census. This is the story of Evan Danny, who is a former pro wrestler turned talk show host who has transcended the wrestling business as has become a huge pop cultural superstar.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah. Sure. Why not? Check it out. You know what I mean? Again, it takes the concept of wrestling, but now we're going to go into this realm, which is kind of like a thing that a lot of wrestlers today are starting to do. They're starting to leave the wrestling business to kind of like pursue Hollywood or other things like that. And this is
Well,
kind
it's
of like that type of story.
yeah, it's got to be hard on you. You don't have a long career getting thrown around like that.
Yeah, exactly. And you're always hurt. Always hurt.
Yeah.
Our next book here is another interesting book, and this is Crimson Cage #1. This is from 2021 from AEW Upshot. It's interesting that it's called AWA, which is formerly a wrestling promotion,
Yeah.
but it has nothing to do with that. High sale of this book is $50 at a 9.8, and that was in February of 2023. Last sale of this book, again, another one that you could get really affordable, $3. $4 is the fair market value. There's no census. There's only 2 copies in the census and no graded books. That's why they haven't sold. This is a no holds bar reimagining of William Shakespeare Macbeth with a wrestling theme.
Okay. A couple of things. One, I love this cover. I think it's awesome. B, what, like, So you're sitting in the office one day, at AW Upshot, and you have your meeting with all your staff, and you're like, I got it. You know what we're going to do? We are going to take wrestling and Shakespeare and make a story. Now get out of my office and go figure it out.
And that's exactly what they did.
And that's what they did.
The cover's crazy. You're right.
Yeah.
It's definitely something, man. It's definitely worth checking out. I can't wait to look this one up. Yeah. Our next book is Hell is a Squared Circle #1. This is from 2022 for Aftershock. High sale of this book is $10 raw. Last sale of this book was $4, and that is the fair market value. There's only one in the census. Big note to put out is that this is an oversized comic book, so it's bigger than your standard size. This is the story of Ted the Irish Mosca Walsh, who is a washed-up wrestler heel trying to turn his life around, behind on rent and child support. His past catches up fast, leaving him with blood on his hands and the law on his heels. Now Ted must outrun his demons and damage he's done, both inside the ring and beyond. This story is all too real. You might have heard stories of wrestlers who have done some heinous things. And I believe that's what this story is trying to showcase. The story of the wrestling business not being as great as some people might think it is. This is one of those stories that kind of tells that story. So it may not be a based on a true story, but it damn well is very close to what the real stories are like.
Yeah, and it sounds like it'd be a really good read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a one shot from Aftershock, and again, $4, man. This book was a $10 book at one time. So our next book is Do a Powerbomb #1. This book came out in 2022 for Image Comics. High sale. This book was $80 and a 9.8, and that was in March of 2023. Last sale of this book was $3. I just realized I don't have the census count for this book because I kind of took what was the old one and put it in there, and I forgot to change that. So I will give you the census count in a minute, but Do a Powerbomb, man. This is a story from Daniel Warren Johnson. He's done some great work here. What's your thoughts on Do a Powerbomb? Did you get a chance to read it just yet?
Yeah, no, I haven't read it yet. I have all of them but one, and I'm going to hopefully find that at the con here in the Falls at the end of May.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't read it before that online or something.
Yeah.
But I'm looking forward to it because everybody I talked to about it says they loved it. So
it is phenomenal. Do a Powerbomb is such a good story because it's a love letter to wrestling. But at the same time, it is a story of heart. It is the story of love. There's some great cliffhangers, and it's Daniel Warren Johnson doing what Daniel Warren Johnson does, right? That's what makes this book so good. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But yeah, so as of today, there's currently 32 copies in the census, which I find a little odd for this book. I think this book has a lot of potential. Daniel Warren Johnson obviously is a popular writer / artist. As you can see with the Wolverine comic book that just came out, people still love his work.
Yeah. And as you know, he goes on, I know that he's kind of ending his run on Transformers, but as people find that and enjoy it, they're going to go back to his other works like Jurassic League and Do a Powerbomb and all that stuff to find books that he's written and done the art for. So
personally, I think this is one of his best books. And that says a lot because he's done some really good stuff. Murder Falcon is another one that a lot of people have a lot of praises for. I personally think this is a great, great book. We're down to our last book, I believe. And dare I say it? Woo! Codename Ric Flair Magic 8 Ball #1. This book came out in 2023 for Scout Comics. High sell of this book is $50 at 9.8. That was back in May of 2024. Last sale of this book was $3, and the fair market value is $2. 9.8 also is $50. Also is the fair market value for the grade. There's only 10 copies in the census, and I love how they put this. This is brand new original comic book details his fact or fiction forays as an international super spy in the 80s and 90s. I read this book, Shane, and I loved it.
Oh, that's awesome. Where did you end up finding it?
It came when it came out back in 2023.
Oh, okay.
I picked it up. It was just one of those books, man, where it's like, it's Ric Flair, man. I got a couple of copies of it, and what I tell you, him being a super spy made total sense.
Well, what's funny about these books, and you can tell me if you did this or not, but it's similar to like reading Transformers. That those characters are so ingrained in a lot of people's heads that when I read it, I hear like Megatron talking like the cartoon.
Oh yeah.
And so I'm curious to know, like, if when you read this, like, do you hear him talking?
So the writer of the story managed to find a way to get his voice into the comic book. Of course, he's doing these things like when he sees a lady, he's like, "Woo!" And he'll do the whining and dining type of thing. The thing with Ric Flair is very similar to Hogan. A lot of the stories you hear about Ric Flair are not good stories.
Yeah.
Right? But it was also at a time where that kind of social behavior was accepted. That doesn't mean it was right.
Yeah.
All right. But it was accepted behavior. Where with Hulk Hogan, it was never accepted behavior, what he said. Right. And he's never really owned up to it in that way. With Ric Flair, however, it's more on the lines of, yeah, this guy was who he was. He was living the character. And I think there's a little more love for Rick than there is for Hogan, even though I think nowadays people don't look at Ric Flair in the same way. You know what I mean? Because it's like, no, dude, what you did was wrong.
Yeah.
But again, it was the 80s. It was the height of the Reagan administration. It was, greed, power, that kind of stuff. And he really lived that lifestyle. He truly lived that lifestyle, even though he himself couldn't afford that lifestyle.
Yeah.
But he lived it, and he definitely took many company credit cards and maxed them out. And because he was Ric Flair and he was able to do it on the ring, they let him do it.
Yeah.
They really did. So, and he's still doing it today. To this day, he's still doing it. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this list of the top 20 wrestling comic books that we utilized here. It was fun doing it. This is one of those, I love doing this. It was a lot of work. I'll give it that much. It was a lot of work, Shane. But yeah. I think this was one worth it. So I hope you guys enjoy this creator spotlight on wrestling comic books. Do you have any of these books? Are you going to be going to search any of these books? Tell me what your thoughts. How do you feel about wrestling? Do you love wrestling? Do you still watch wrestling? I want to know in the comments. Let me know. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe and share this with somebody. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more comic content. Check out these other videos for even more insight. And I'll see you at the next one. Excelsior.